Hello, everybody. Welcome to Truthworthy. I'm Levi Pingleton, and tonight I'm going to be talking about St. Cajetan's theology of papal infallibility that helped to develop the definition, the dogmatic definition at Vatican I and Pastar Aeternus on papal infallibility. And I'm just going to go ahead and dive right into it. So I hope you guys enjoy it, and I hope that you learn a lot and take something out of it that you can apply at home. So let's go ahead. Cajetan was considered probably the most important defender of papal infallibility. He was a teacher, a philosopher, a commentator on Aquinas, famously, also a cardinal. His actual name is Tommaso de Avio, and he was, like I said, a cardinal of the Catholic Church back in the 14th century during the time of Martin Luther and the Reformation, and so he's a very important figure, and also probably arguably one of the most, if not the most important theologian in the development of the definition of papal infallibility at Vatican I. He wrote two anti-conciliarist tracts called Auctoritatis Papae et Conciliae Sive Ecclesiae Comparata in 1511 and Apologia de Comparata Auctoritate Papae et Conciliae in 1514. And he tried to bring Martin Luther back to the fold, but was obviously unsuccessful at that. In those two anti-conciliarist tracts, he was defending papal infallibility and the supremacy of the Pope as a whole against the conciliarist argument that a council had supreme authority even over the Pope in its definitions. Cajetan also composed a number of works that he responded to Martin Luther's concerns that were previously raised at the Diet of Augsburg in 1518, which is a very famous meeting where basically the Augsburg Confession was written up that now the Lutherans still hold to this day. Cajetan's scriptural exegesis on papal infallibility is grounded in what's called the three loci classici for papal infallibility, which are the classical texts that even today modern Catholic apologists still use in order to provide a defense for the Pope's infallibility in Scripture. Those are in Matthew chapter 16, John 20, and Luke 22. Luke 22:32 being the basis of arguing papal infallibility for Cajetan. His scriptural exegesis occurs in the broader context of papal supremacy, which papal infallibility is but one aspect. Cajetan's principal defense of papal infallibility based on Luke 22:32 is that he argues that Christ not only guaranteed the personal and public faith of Peter by saying, "I pray for you that your faith might not fail," but also argued that Christ also guaranteed the faith of Peter's successors when he added the command to Peter to strengthen your brethren. Cajetan said the way Peter strengthens his brethren is by assisting the universal church in preserving solidity in faith, the faithful being secured in faith, and not tossed to and fro in uncertainty that arises concerning the faith. Cajetan second most frequently cites John 20, saying that when Christ said to Peter, "Feed my sheep," he established a monarchical government whereby Peter became Christ's vicar of after Christ's ascension to heaven. Feed, Cajetan says, includes not only ruling power, but also the power to teach doctrine. Cajetan's larger claim from John 20 is that it establishes that the church is not a temporal government like other earthly kingdoms, but is a supernatural government that establishes the Pope's ability to issue solemn, infallible teachings, possible due to the threefold supernatural aspect of the office. One, the first supernatural aspect of the papal office is that Cajetan is clear in his expressing the supernatural founding by God of the papal office, its de jure divino establishment by divine right. The second aspect being the Pope's authority comes immediately from Christ. It is not mediated by the universal church or a council. And this was big in his defense against the Conciliarists of the time, who were arguing that the councils had superiority and authority over the Pope. The third and most important aspect of the supernatural aspects of the papal office is that the Pope's ability to teach infallibly is based on the ongoing divine assistance guaranteed to Peter and his successors in John 20. The principal agent at work in Peter's ministry is not Peter himself, but rather Christ. Not Christ having promised Peter that he would build his church on Peter, and not that Peter would build Christ's church on Peter. Cajetan has a scientific style of theology. He was not one to be rhetorical, but his simple style was expressive of his calmness and ability to face the storms of the time during the Reformation and dealing with all of the heresy and errors that were thrown at the church and all of the attacks coming from without and from within the church in order to defend her perennial teachings and eventually lead up to really solemnly defining a lot of Catholicism's core doctrine and dogma, especially when it comes to the Pope and when it comes to the canon of Scripture and some other very, very serious topics like, faith and works, justification, all of those, things that we still argue with Protestants today that were settled at the Council of Trent and, explain to the laity and to all the faithful that the expressions of the Catholic truth have always remained the same and that they're always going to be the same and that they're that same unchanging apostolic deposit of faith that Christ gave to his apostles and that his apostles have handed down all the way through the centuries now to us through the ecclesiological ministry of the Roman Catholic Church and the supreme power of the Pope. His views reflected the papal ecclesiology of St. Thomas Aquinas and the arguments of Juan of Torquemada against the councils of Constance and Basel, which were councils that were decidedly undefinitive due to some very serious issues that had happened at the council and some serious issues with the authority of those councils, especially with the Pope not signing off on all of its decrees and not being present at them during certain essential times. Basically, against the Conciliarists, he held the views of Aquinas that a council cannot act apart from its head, the Pope. Cajetan followed Torquemada's views on the Council of Basel due to Pope Eugenius IV approving of its inception and continuation, but never approving of its decrees on conciliar superiority in its second and 17th sessions, which, according to Torquemada and Cajetan's view, broke the rule that a council is only valid after the three obediences have been adhered to and the personal presiding of the Pope as president has authorized it as a universal council, which did not happen at the Council of Basel. Thus, the Council of Basel was flawed in many ways. What was promulgated was done out of hatred for the Apostolic See at that council, and it was supported by a multitude of people lacking authority who themselves could not even come to a consensus on anything during that council. There were just a whole lot of really bad issues with that council at Basel. So legitimately, it was condemned as illegitimate. In relation to Vatican I here and its dogmatic definition of papal infallibility, in Cajetan's theology, he does not think that every utterance of the Pope is infallible, and he names a number of criteria which he thinks are necessary for the Pope to teach infallibly. And in the definition itself, it declares that when the pontiff speaks ex cathedra, with the emphasis being there in all caps on ex cathedra, emphasizing that it's going to be obvious when the Pope is speaking authoritatively and infallibly on faith, on a doctrine of faith and morals defined for the entire universal church to adhere to. The first criterion with respect to the subject or bearer of papal infallibility, the Pope, must be acting in his role as the supreme head of the church and issuing an authoritative judgment concerning the faith. Insofar as he is the head of the church, the Pope cannot err in solemnly defining the Christian faith for the basic reason that the faith of the whole church is formed in part by the definitions of the Roman pontiff. On this, Cajetan is in line with his Dominican predecessors, Hervaeus Natalis and St. Antonarius. Cajetan held that the Pope can err as a private individual, but not when he intends to bind the entire church definitively. Because the Pope is able to sin with respect to the Pope's personal faith, he can be a heretic merely by an internal act. When he errs merely by an internal act, he does not cease to be Pope. And this is something that's very important to understand and distinguish within Cajetan's theology, that he makes it very clear that whenever the Pope errs merely by an internal act, that he does not cease to be Pope. Just like a bishop who is a heretic by merely an internal act does not cease to be a bishop. And this is really, big to understand right now, especially with sedevacantists and, others that are, like benevacantists and people that are denying that Pope Francis is the Pope, either publicly or even internally. And this is a major error, because even though Pope Francis has said things that are very unclear and has, taught things in his, conversations on airplanes and in different interviews that were definitely would be heretical, but not in his ordinary magisterial teaching. He doesn't just lose office every time he utters something that he shouldn't. Every time that he talks is not a moment of infallibility for the Pope. And Cajetan and the papal infallibility definition from Vatican I and Pastar Aeternus are very clear on this. Cajetan, however, holds, let's just pause there for a minute, actually. Considering the bishop, a bishop in general, who is a heretic by a merely internal act, not ceasing to lose their authority as a bishop, their place as a bishop, their jurisdiction as a bishop of a diocese. If we held to think that just by an internal act that a bishop would lose their office, or that the Pope would lose their office, we would hold the view that the ecclesiastical office was dependent upon the official's state of grace, which is a condemned position that was held by both Huss and the Donatists. And obviously, they are heretics and were proposing a heretical opinion at the time. Cajetan, however, does hold that once the Pope is interiorly a heretic and then says out loud this heresy, even in the softest voice, he is excommunicated as soon as he is a heretic. He is no longer the Pope in the eyes of God. And that's an important distinction. Cajetan never goes on to say that, outside of a council, a council can't condemn a pope, but they can declare that the canonical crime of heresy has. For our purposes, Cajetan's complicated explanation about the loss of office, the loss of papal office, I'm not going to go through a whole long time on that. Basically, the important point is that Cajetan would reject later opinions and common hyper-papalist opinions that are occurring nowadays by admitting that the Pope's infallibility is limited to his pronouncements as supreme head of the universal church, not, as a private theologian or as a private citizen, not on an airplane on his way back from some trip, and not in some interview with, a questionable interviewer from the get and his style of interviewing, who I'm mentioning is Scalfari, who, didn't write down anything during his interviews, but just kind of wrote down and gave his retake of the interview off the top of his head. So pretty questionable journalistic practices here in America, but still valid forms of expression of journalism in Italy. So you can think what you want about that one. Concerning the object of papal infallibility, Cajetan is clear that the Pope is restricted to defining only matters of faith and morals. A phrase he rarely uses is faith and morals. He actually preferred to use matters of faith, and I'm not really sure why, but I'm thinking that the phrase faith and morals had a wide range of meanings by the 16th century, and Cajetan is actually significantly less clear than Cano or Bellarmine, who are two other primary theologians that they referred to in, developing their definition of papal infallibility at Vatican I. Cajetan, following Aquinas, holds that there are all sorts of issues which are outside the object of infallibility. Certain political judgments, such as determining who the legitimate ruler of a nation is, or proving that some bishop has engaged in simony, would not be objects of infallibility. Cajetan teaches that when the Apostolic See defines some matter of faith, it does nothing more than declare what is contained in the faith given by Christ. This would seem to be something along the lines of what later theologians call the primary object of infallibility, which is that apostolic deposit of faith that's given by Christ to the apostles and handed faithfully down through the succession of bishops in the Roman Catholic Church, whose head is the Prince of the Apostles, St. Peter, and his successors. It's difficult to know exactly what he includes amongst the primary objects of papal infallibility, but he would likely include the extent of the canon of Scripture as well. That the canon of Scripture would be a primary object of papal supremacy and papal infallibility, according to Cajetan. Cajetan also seems to have a secondary object of infallibility in mind when he affirms that the Pope may also define matters of faith that were believed before implicitly and are now simply being made explicit. This is probably something like Thomas Aquinas' explanation that when an ecumenical council promulgates a new creed to meet some theological error, it is simply drawing out what was already implicitly contained in the creeds of previous councils. Finally, Cajetan does not restrict the object of infallibility to merely spiritual matters, insofar as they are ordered to think spiritual. What is interesting is that Cajetan does not explicitly mention the issue of the Pope's infallibility in the canonization of saints, even though he repeatedly cites Aquinas' Questiones Quodubitales, which affirms the power of the Pope, this power of the Pope to canonize saints. Cajetan's not concerned only with the proper object of infallibility, but also with the mode of that teaching, which is, being promulgated. Whether or not it's infallible is, in his view, dependent upon whether or not it is being taught in the proper mode of authority in order to be an infallible teaching in the first place. It's not enough for the Pope to teach about something that could be the object of infallibility. He also has to assert that his teaching is infallible in that declaration or in the document itself. Cajetan has recourse to scholastic distinctions to help him explain what he means. When a Pope deals with matters of faith, he must treat them formally and not just materially for a decision to be infallible, which means he can't just be speaking of the doctrine in order to support some other claim or topic. He has to be very obviously formally declaring that doctrine in its primary form. So he can't just treat them materially. He has to be talking and treating a doctrine formally in order to have the statement be an infallibly protected statement. And that Cajetan's distinction is an important one. What he means is that when the Pope intends to define something to be believed by the faithful definitively, he is treating it formally. There are, after all, almost an infinite number of ways that the matters of faith can be treated in papal documents. So, it has to be made clear that he's formally teaching the faithful to definitively hold the view that he is expressing. These matters of faith may be used as ornamentation, or in a passing manner, or as a part of a theological agreement, none of which is to assert infallibility, which is a very important thing to understand, especially, from Cajetan's views, because obviously they were heavily relied upon in creating the definition, the dogmatic definition for papal infallibility of Vatican I. Cajetan uses various terms to describe the definitive nature of an infallible judgment, including definitive judgment, final sentence, ultimate decision, and definitive sentence. Thus, the mode of decree is another significant limitation on the powers of the Pope. There are two final limitations of papal authority to Cajetan, which are divine law and previous infallible statements. All definitive judgments of the papacy must conform to divine law. And as we all know, divine law cannot change. He's clear that papal decisions are subject to Scripture. He's also clear that the Pope cannot change the matters of natural law, even on issues concerned with virtue and vice. And, that's a key distinction to think about in the most recent papal decree on homosexual blessings, that, the Pope doesn't have the ability or the authority to change matters of natural law, even when the issue is concerned with virtue or vice. And I would say that would include in those pastoral decisions, to even consider blessing a homosexual couple. But That's my opinion, and that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother video. Cajetan, following Aquinas, makes it clear that neither the Church nor the Pope can contravene divine law on any issue like fornication. Moreover, it is important to note that for Cajetan, an infallible decision never establishes a new faith, but simply makes explicit which was formerly implicit. So for Cajetan, papal infallibility is fundamentally in service to the divine word and not the master of it. The Pope is also limited by all previous infallible decisions, including those by ecumenical and provincial councils. It is also the case that all previous papal definitive judgments are binding on the current Pope, and that all the future ones will be equally binding on his successors. And that basically gives out my overview of the theology of Cajetan that was used in order to develop the definition of papal infallibility at Vatican I. And like I said earlier, look forward to a part 2 to this, where I go a little further into the controversy between the conciliarists and those who held the moderate view, like Cajetan and Bellarmine. And I'll go a lot further into the whole entire controversy and the debate that sparked the definition to be declared, and for the church to step in and solemnly declare a dogma on the matter so that people could not be confused and could start, further unifying in faith. So I hope that you guys like this, and I hope that you guys will hit that like button and subscribe to my channel, and be looking forward to the next few videos that I've got coming out, because one of them is going to end up being a part 2 to this one. So have a great night, and God bless you guys. Peace.